Yeah, I mean, I think, it kind of goes back to, a lot of teams tend to point fingers. Is it IT? Is it supply chain? Is it finance? Is it analysts? At the end of the day, anyone who encounters the issue, whether it's somebody in operations at a local hospital to someone higher up, it's really everybody's problem.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On today's episode of Power Supply, we'll speak with Shireen Ahmad. She's an executive partner with Midstream. We're going to be talking about data hygiene and, a little bit of disruption in the conversation today, but also best practices, Gary.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good one to challenge yourself. We brush over it. We've got to accept it that this is a definite need, and it's not just an AI feed. This has a human piece of it that really has to be resolved. So looking forward to what Shireen has to say today.
All right, everybody, stay with us. We'll be right back with Shireen Ahmad after a short break.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Shireen Ahmad, executive partner at Midstream. And the topic today is data hygiene. And Shireen, you and I probably have known each other for a little over a year now, I'd say. And I think data hygiene is one of your passions as we kind of got together and explored some topics for the podcast. So, everybody hears bad data in, bad data out, but we're going to be taking that to a whole different level in the conversation today. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Shireen, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself to the audience? I'm sure there's some past guests that'll recognize. I know you have been listening and getting caught up a little bit, and I know many of our past guests as well. But tell the audience who doesn't know you a little bit about your career.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in healthcare for about 25 years. I started off in the fabulous world of medical practice management, and then started working for healthcare systems about 15 years ago in the finance space. And I kept getting recruited over and over by supply chain because I used to do productivity and performance improvement, and they had a need for a number of performance improvement projects. And when I walked into a storeroom and saw that there were stacks and boxes of exam gloves in one OR supply closet, we were like, okay, there's a problem here. So that's when I said yes and made it over to supply chain. Over the years, I've worked at CHI, which merged into Common Spirit, and ended up my career or my tenure there as a vice president for supply chain, specifically in data and analytics, GPO business, and financial insights. And a few months ago, transitioned over to the other side, the dark side in some cases, but working as an executive partner for Midstream. And part of the reason I decided to make the leap is that, when you've seen one health system, and everyone seems to have very unique data challenges, and to be able to work with a number of other health systems to help clean data has been a rewarding challenge. I wouldn't say interesting. It's been really rewarding to see all of the benefits and help we can give.
We're going to jump into a bunch of different topics, I think, today. And one question, obviously, about data hygiene. You've seen a lot of different health systems. And make that guy feel that's in Tupelo. Let him feel better that his system and his information is not any worse than the next guy. In other words, a lot of people have some really messed up situations, don't they?
Yeah, I would agree. It just varies. So from health system to health system, we saw one with that had just made a shift to a CLM system. And what happened was the parent-child relationship collapsed. So where they had all of their amendments tied to the master agreements and the price files all linked. Exactly. When it transitioned over, it broke apart and it was all like one to one. So that whole remapping had to occur again. And in ERP systems, we've seen 10 different versions of the same suture in the system. And specifically when you see mergers and acquisitions occur, you're going to find that gets triplicated in so many different ways. So yeah, I would say everyone's probably living with some version of this or another.
And does it really matter on sophistication of the system? In other words, could it be the 10 hospital system has really clean data because they have better resources than the guy that has 100 beds, or is it just across the board?
I would say it's probably the latter. It's across the board because it depends on how you decide to architect your data, right? If you have a master data management program that really looks at systematically, this is how we are going to approach it from the front end, you're going to have generally a cleaner methodology and a cleaner governance around the way you want to structure your data. It really does vary because most health systems don't have a master data management, program within their system.
I really like that CLM example because a lot of times what we hear is, okay, we're going to implement a new ERP. And so, we got to go in there and we've got to get, the item master all cleaned up and we got to make sure. And it's like, oh, we got to get the data right. And it becomes this project. And, sometimes keeping data clean it can be a real chore. But what I like about the CLM is they might have had really good data, but the transition itself wound up causing issues with data like you talked about with the parent and child relationships. And so, I think there's also something to be said for vetting that onboarding or that transition when you're going to shift to a new technology. And I don't even know if that's really part of our discussion today, but I think it probably warrants some highlighting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing, like whenever you look at any system, whenever you're trying to evaluate a system out there, one of the things we've got to look at is how is your current system structured, right? What was the methodology? What was the purpose behind it? And then also vetting those same capabilities in other systems. Because going back to the CLM system, when Common Spirit was looking at other CLMs, one of the reasons we ended up not transitioning to one that we were, the company had decided to move to was because supply chain had certain capabilities, right? Built into the CLM system, meaning like you could do live redlining. You could have vendors enter that. So if you have, like, for example, an ERP system that has an add-on for CLM where, you've got this repository of all your contracts, and it's great to have it all linked, but now you don't have vendors that can come into your system, that detracts from the overall purpose, right? So you've got to really understand what's the purpose that you've built this system around, and like what is the methodology that you want to incorporate going into it. So there's a lot of different factors that you've really got to consider before you shift to any other system or a new system, because everyone's going to tell you their system's the best. And it can do 10 million things. It's got AI overlay. It's got this, it's got that. But, here's the thing, like, you've got to really understand where you are and understand your capabilities today. And when you transition, what is it that you want? And will that new system be able to fulfill that?
I think you almost take 10 steps backwards, then you realize you got to take 100 steps backwards, Shireen. And I don't want to pin you down on this conversation of the percentage of really owning the current state. But how much of the time before you even get to really saying this is your gap, and this is your second gap, and this is your tertiary gap, what's our focus going to be first? How much time are you spending to really, truly understand? Because I even think about all the policies written that go behind it, not to go backwards again once you've implemented. So how much time is spent on really truly uncovering it when you think you have it, you keep going?
Oh, I would tell you that there were so many times we thought we had it and
Yeah.
didn't. And I think it's so funny because I think there's such a lack of investment in data hygiene in general, right? Like, it's probably the most underrated of any area in supply chain because there's no real ROI, like no real tangible ROI, and nothing grabs the attention until there's some sort of catastrophic event, right?
Right.
And that's when it starts getting the investment. But here's the thing, like, I think the reason that it's so important to really start looking at and mapping out what the capabilities are is because there are so many downstream impacts to it, right? You've got to really understand what good, clean data does in terms of your sourcing and contracting events and how it impacts your inventory levels and your reorder points, and so many other things are really downstream of good data management and good data hygiene. So it's such an instrumental piece, and I can't iterate that enough, even though that was just a small portion of my role at Common Spirit. So I'd say definitely always try to be as inclusive as you can be at the outset and try to get as much, I guess, insight from others who have already been down that journey, because I think that's really what's going to help any health system that's starting that to really ensure that they don't hit the same potholes.
I feel like there's so many conversations around data and keeping your data clean, but yet you still think this is an underrated topic. Why is that?
Because it's like the broccoli of supply chain. I mean, sourcing and contracting can generally they hit the, they're able to ring the bell, right? They're able to say, this is where our savings are. They can say, oh, we saved the organization $50 million in this one initiative. But, data hygiene doesn't do that, right? Data cleanliness, data management, it just doesn't do it. Nobody really wants to put that on their LinkedIn and say, I was in charge of data management. So I think it's just it doesn't grab the headlines like any other area does in supply chain. If there's an operational issue, that grabs a headline. If there's a disruption, that grabs a headline. But data management really doesn't do that until there's a major problem.
So it's those headlines that drive any kind of initiative typically, like, oh, wait, this is important. Is that how you've kind of seen it in the past? Is there has to be a bigger impact for people to invest time and resources into this area?
Yeah, I definitely think that, it's, two things, actually. I think it's one, it's the financial impact, right? I think unless it's extremely pressing, it's usually the one area that's cut, at least from what I've seen. Generally, it doesn't get the investment because most CFOs are not seeing it as a fundamental piece of what drives volume in a hospital, right? They're looking at the clinical areas, or they're looking at potential cost containment, but they're not really looking at those pieces. And I think a lot of people think that that's an IT problem because they think that anything to do with data should reside in IT. But generally, IT doesn't have a very strong understanding of data hygiene and how that impacts other operational areas in supply chain because they don't really speak the language. And the language, I think, is very important in supply management, supply data management specifically.
I want to ask this question and ask if you've been down this road many times. So when you're trying to get clean data, when you come in and you're evaluating spend, right? Spend specifically, whether it's GPO enhanced, local, whatever it looks like, you're trying to do the triangle of trust, if you will, an agreement. Here's the PO spend, and here's what the service looks like at the ground level with the clinical teams just to validate it. But the price parity, pull spend within the hospital and pull spend from the vendors.
Yes.
Where do you go with those two to coordinate those? I want to know your experience on that.
Yeah, it's so funny because there's so many points of discrepancy, right? Like there's a contract to the PO, because if your contract price isn't loaded in time, right, there's going to be a discrepancy there. I love this question because we're actually dealing with this in Midstream. But then there's the PO to the invoice, right? So what's been put out on your PO as what you assume is your correct contracted price, and what the invoice comes back as from the vendor could also be discrepant because let's say the and the vendor hasn't loaded the correct price, or, so there could be a discrepancy there. And then AP doesn't always know what to pay. And there's a potential discrepancy there. And then layer distribution on there, for other things. It's such a problem to be able to triangulate, as you put it, the right price, the price that should be paid. It's one of the things we're actually trying to solve at Midstream, because it's been, everybody has a different answer, whether it should be the PO price that should be honored, the contract price, or, no health system's going to honor the invoice price necessarily, unless it's lower than what you're seeing in any other case. But that's generally how it ends up being. I always laugh because everybody talks about this three-way match, right? Of what should be actually triangulated upon. And I think that the most interesting thing is that everybody has a different way of defining it.
Very well said.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Can you dive into that a little bit more with the three-way match? Because I think that's a super important thing to understand. And I'm sure plenty of people at a senior level get this, right? But we have a lot of folks that are listening that are earlier in their career, and they probably hear three-way match and they think one thing.
Justin, I hate that question because
It's easier said. There's so many fragments in it. It's like, it's not the perfect, it's like a hexagon after it's supposed to be a triangle, but keep going.
Exactly. Because technically you could even say it's a four-way match, right? Like,
right.
Is AP the one that finally determines what's actually the price that gets paid? And if the vendor accepts it, well, should we just not go with that? I don't know. To me, it's like the worst. It's the worst problem. Well, here's the thing. So thresholds is the other issue too, right? Like thresholds, it's a man-made expression on top of what people think should happen, right? Because here's the thing, if you have 50 cents as your threshold, there's a variance of 50 cents on what you pay between what's discrepant between the invoice and the PO. Okay, you say, okay, fine, we'll pay it because it's only 50, it's within 50 cents. But if your volume is super high, that 50 cents could translate into millions of dollars over a couple of years, right? So is that really the right thing? Or even if you look at it from a percentage perspective, if you say, oh, it's 2% off, or there's only a 2% variance between what's being charged, we'll just go ahead and pay it. Again, volume can trump that, and you can end up paying millions of dollars. So I don't know. I don't know that there's a real solution out there. I hate all of it.
And I'm going to say this because I got to say it, but even flip the coin of, we're going to do zero threshold, and we're going to do the labor cost of the analogy of stepping over quarters to get pennies. I mean, it completely makes no sense in my mind, but it is a pendulum swift. We probably could have a full podcast on thresholds.
Yes.
Period.
Well,
yeah.
So here's a question for you, Shireen. I mean, how important in tackling thresholds, if it's fundamental, you're going to use it, is it really more about setting a baseline and always working to improve it and balance that equation of how much you're investing in it and just trending in the right direction? Is that what you'd rather see, is movement towards improvement more than anything?
I'd love to just see an AI governance system built into it, because I think that's actually probably the best outcome, right? Because here's the thing, I know systems that have invested dozens of people to throw at the problem, right? That they will hire 27 people and I will leave that system unnamed, but I know of at least one that's got over 20 people just tackling that problem. And here's the thing, part of it goes back to the whole data fragmentation piece too, right? If you have multiple ERP systems as a result of your, kind of going back to the whole data, issue, if you've got multiple ERP systems, you may have different price points loaded. So that's another issue, right? There's so many things that could be the root cause of what's driving that discrepancy, that does it make sense to have a human in the loop to really look at and identify what the root cause is? But maybe, but again, to Skinner's point, it could be pennies, and then does it really make sense? So I don't know. I think at the end of the day, I mean, the ideal state is zero threshold, $0, 0 cents, but really understand what's driving it. and being able to pull out that root cause from the front end or from the back end.
Yeah, you're looking for precision, but you're looking for a technology to bring that level of precision because people are human.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean,
Yeah.
the reason thresholds are in place is because doesn't make sense to have a human actually interviewing when there's only a few cents on the line. But if it's, again, it's almost a judgment call, right? Because what does that few cents actually add up to over time? So it's one of those hard questions that I think anyone would have to really ask. Because I also know health systems that only have one person doing that for 9 hospitals. And I've seen that case as well, where they're just paying everything. And we actually did this recently, where we saw there were these 9 hospitals. The item was used at 4 of them. Only the flagship hospital was paying the correct price, the correct contracted price. The other 3 were paying what looked like list price. And that difference was $2,000 per each stent. So that was crazy. It was insane. And so then what do you do with that, right? And that's where I would have said it would have made sense to have probably more people throw at that problem, because they would have saved more.
It goes right back to your initial comment, parent, child, could be the ship too. There's so many pieces of this that could be the problem, but you've got to have clean data. You've got to, and there's not enough focus on it. There really isn't.
Yeah. In that case, could have been just a rostering issue, right? Like the price parity issue was just that the one hospital was was on the contract initially, and they may have expanded service lines later. And then all of a sudden you've got 4 more hospitals doing that procedure, but those hospitals weren't added. And so now you've got a parity issue between them. So, I mean, like there's so many problems. There's so many things that could have occurred in that situation or in those situations that you really almost have to look at it across the board. But again, it goes back to data.
So if you talk to anybody in like safety and security and say, hey, who's responsible for the safety of the patients and the staff, right? Their answer is going to be, we all are. Everybody who works in the building is responsible for the safety of this, organization, right? Is that the same thing with data? Like when you pose the question, who's responsible for keeping the data clean? Is that we're all responsible? It's the royal we?
Well, I mean, that's the most honest answer. It's nobody, but it's also everybody, right? Usually there's nobody designated, but if there's nobody designated, then that means everybody's responsible. And that's the analyst who comes across, 10 different versions of the same suture, or when they're doing their analysis, or it's finance, or anybody who's coming across the issue would then be responsible. So yeah, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to a lot of teams tend to like point fingers. Is it IT? Is it supply chain? Is it finance? Is it analysts? At the end of the day, anyone who encounters the issue, whether it's somebody in operations at a local hospital to someone higher up, it's really everybody's problem.
So it's funny because you say it's everybody's problem, but if the culture of the organization is the flip side of that, which is nobody's responsible, is that when you start running into trouble with data and data hygiene?
Well, I mean, personally, I still love the idea of the master data management specialist who's really responsible, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the right governance structures around it, everything collapses. Here's the thing. The information needs to be built at the front end correctly, right? Whether it's the item in the contract or whether it's the item in the ERP system with all the attributes, it's got to be done at the front end. And so if you have the right governance, you're likely going to have fewer issues at the back end. So I would say ideally, I'm going to always advocate for a master data management specialist, but again, it mitigates a lot of those issues downstream, in my opinion.
I mean, that would be a best practice for sure. I think you've mentioned several others, but would you add any best practices to the list that we haven't discussed?
Oh gosh, there's like probably 10. But I think I always hear this about categorizations and things like that. Always, like I would say, have a single source of truth for any data domain that you're looking at, and then always defend that. Like if you're using G10s, that's what you're going to use across the board. If you're looking at contracts, it's your CLM, not your ERP. You've got to look at everything reconciles back to the source, and then build that validation layer. And again, at the front end, not at the back end. You don't want to have to deal with those issues later one-on-one. But if you're building that at the front end, it's like ensuring that you're building things correctly, right? You catch it at the intake. Because if you're doing it afterwards, it's like editing a book, right? Like you're editing a book after it's been written. I think it helps to have outside eyes. There's a lot of companies out there that help with that work. And I think that's actually not a bad idea. Measuring the data quality, just like you would clinical quality data, is another really good thing. Because if you look at, I think most people look at completeness, but I don't think they look at data accuracy as a metric. Invest in the boring infrastructure. That's what I would say. Number one, invest in it, because it reaps a lot of rewards downstream, because then you don't have to have the 27 people looking at price discrepancies.
I would love to have an MDM right alongside as we're writing new agreements, or implementing a new contract library management tool that has supply chain analytics to support it. So I would love to have that clean data, because it's so downstream and you don't want to fix it at the end. It makes no sense, and really mapping that out to what it would look like, because clean data is a continual opportunity. And whether it's a lead person that's running point with AI and evaluating that to make sure it's correct, we got to get there. And it's across the board, to your point, Shireen. It's across the board. Nobody is perfect. Everybody's got a lot of the same issues still.
Yeah, I hate, and like I said, it's like you see one health system, you see one. Everyone seems to have such varying challenges. And what's interesting is every health system we've talked to, the first thing they ask is, do you do a data assessment? Can you rate our data for us? And to me, I was really shocked, because like a couple of them had just moved to ERP systems, and we were like, that's, scratch your heads. It's not what you would expect to hear from a health system that's already gone through all of the work, the legwork, ideally, to have cleaned up their data. But they were like, we're still not confident. And that's the unfortunate piece, is that when people lose confidence in the data, it's like they've lost their source of truth. And so they no longer have trust. And when you don't have trust in the data, every decision that comes out after made on that data is kind of with this level of, I don't know if we made the right call on that one or not. I don't know if we made the right decision there or not, and you feel like you're kind of doing it kind of half blind, right? And it's not a good place to be, to feel so unconfident or incompetent in your decisions. It's if you don't have that confidence at the outset, it's just it leads to a lot of heartache, I think, at the end.
We hear the term supply chain disruption all the time, and it's kind of that negative side of the term disruption. But, there's a lot of people out there that are innovators, and they embrace the word disruption, and they see that as a positive thing. And so, I think we're at a kind of a critical juncture in technology where there's some positive disruption that can come from innovations. But I also kind of look at it as, if you had clean data, how could you disrupt the organization in a positive way with internal innovations as well? Do you have any examples or thoughts on that topic from both sides of the coin?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, because one, you're absolutely right. Disruption can be both positive or negative, right? And most people look at the negative connotation as, a plant went down and now we don't have IV solutions, so now we've got to scramble to find that, or they'll see it from a positive sense. Well, there's disruption. What can we do to come up with sustainable solutions to fix it, right? In Common Spirit, like we did really look at disruptive events as learning events, and I think that's one of the things that kind of was one of the things I really loved when I worked there, was that we would use those as learning opportunities. How can we improve so we could be more sustainable at the end of the day? Like when COVID occurred, obviously it was difficult to get products, and we were innovative in some ways in going direct, right? And we looked at what were our most critical SKUs. And again, it goes back to the data, right? We had to be able to pull that information to see what would make sense to directly source from other countries. And so we built that capability at that point to be able to try to understand that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that question's more fishing for ideas in so many ways, right? And also to just kind of frame up, because sometimes disruption is negative, but something positive comes out of it. And sometimes you're just changing things for the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too is that I think one of the other things too with disruption is that there's always going to be some sort of disruption until like there's a miraculous type of wholly integrated, CLM, ERP, vendor management, everything. If there was a perfect system out there, there would be no issue, right? Ideally, there would be no problems whatsoever. But I think one of the reasons supply chain exists is because we thrive on problems. And I think that's the opportunity in a lot of ways too, is that because we have such disparate systems and they're not really intended to work together, right? Like you have items in the charge master and the EHR does not necessarily work with an ERP system. We just don't see that type of integration across all of our different systems. So there's always going to be opportunities.
Yeah, when I hear three-way match, as we go back to that, it's something that probably needs some disruption, right? I think of like that bill-only PO process is like, that's where I think it really plays out. When the match isn't there, that is really disruptive in the negative sense for the health system. And how do you tackle that proactively? It's just such a challenge. And, that's probably an area where some of that thresholds come into play, right? Because the OR is a revenue center. So, so much of this data cleanliness and some of the things that sort of present themselves as challenges, a lot of it comes down to culture in this really weird way, because you'd say, but data's just kind of like data. It's like, it's logical. The numbers are the numbers, math, just maths. And when it doesn't, we just have to work on the equation. But a big piece of that equation really is the culture of the organization, isn't it?
I think you're right. Again, like ideally, you wouldn't need a master data management system if everything was built correctly in the front end and everybody pitched in and did their due diligence. And if they found a problem, they escalated it to the right people. Ideally, if you had the culture that, really focused on everybody's in charge of data, right? Everybody's responsible for all of the inputs. Yeah, then absolutely. That would be ideal state. And I kind of laugh because if you think about supply chain, it's like everybody's got like 10 million things on their plate and everybody's got so many priorities that they're trying to work through. I think resource wise, everyone feels a little bit constrained, not probably a lot constrained, let's say. And so, yeah, like, even if you have the best culture though, I think there's always going to be a bit of challenge because reality is that, we all live in these like resource constrained environments. And so we're always going to need more. But I think that's one of the reasons that I think having that really strong master data management ideology is probably the right thing to do.
Great. Shireen, this has been a fantastic interview. And do you have anything that you'd like to add before we wrap up? Any kind of closing thoughts for folks out there? Sage words of advice?
Yeah, I don't know how sage this is, but I think at the end of the day, going back to your question about culture, I think the one thing I would say data hygiene isn't really a technology problem. It's a trust problem, and I think that, if you think about every like dirty record as a little lie, these all can kind of tell us something. And eventually all those little lies add up to a moment and we can't trust the system and what it's telling us. I think that goes back to the confidence issue. So I think that's the moment that we have to really prevent. And I think if people were looking at this, I think one, I'd say thank you to all the people that really work on master data management or work on cleaning data management altogether, because I think it's a really thankless job. And I think they deserve a hand for sure.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. But they're also some of the best in healthcare because they're closer to, they're having to create all these workarounds and without a lot of the tools that they need. So I would just say, understand that this is really not the technology issue. It's really making sure that you've got the right trust in the systems you have and finding the right partners out there too.
Excellent, Shireen. Great job today. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Great. Well, thank you. I had a lot of fun. You guys are great.
That was Shireen Ahmad, executive partner at Midstream, talking about data hygiene and why she thinks it's still an underrated topic. And, maybe the topic's not underrated, but I do feel like data hygiene is underinvested in for sure. And we talked a lot about that. And I think Shireen gave us some really great perspectives on how to ensure that we're doing proper data hygiene, but also making the most of what we have, right? Because we are usually very, resource constrained, Gary.
Oh, 100%. And I think it's a topic that people just brush over and get to the next step and let's get the agreement signed and implement. And it's like 10 steps backwards, 100 steps backwards. And her wealth of knowledge was a great episode to listen to. So the data cleansing, the hygiene, the master data management, it's one to listen to. She did a great job. Looking forward to releasing this one.
All right, everybody. On behalf of Hayes, Gary, and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.